thing is that, you know, he was devastated, you know, when he came over to our offices, and, you know, he was as bad as anybody I've ever seen when a fight pulls out.
We've all had that fight that we all really wanted to see, but it just never happened. Sometimes the timeline just doesn't match up, or there's negotiation issues. Today I want to talk about the top 5 fights that we never saw that everybody wants to see, the top 5 most hyped fights. And guys, I'm gonna be honest, when I first did this, I thought that I was gonna have to put in a bunch of filler fights and things like that. Maybe the top 2 would be fights that we actually wanted to see, but there were so many fights that I had a problem putting all of them on the list. There was a lot of fights that we just didn't get to see, that a lot of people forget about, that just got canceled for one reason or the other. So if you guys want to see a part 2 to this video, let me know in the comment section below and I'll consider making it. But before we get into this, I want to remind you guys to hit the subscribe button, like, comment, and share. We're almost at 12k subs, so if you guys could just hit the subscriber goal and comment to help the algorithm, I'd very much appreciate it. And make sure to check out my Discord server. The link is in the description, or you can press the button on the screen to join right now. But let's get into it. Number 5, Brock Lesnar versus DC. Now, Brock Lesnar, of course, was a big powerhouse in the heavyweight division in the early days of the UFC, right? Around the time of UFC 100, I mean, he headlined that event. The guy sold a lot of pay-per-views and was a pretty big star, and obviously he came back for UFC 200 for kind of like a one-off sort of deal. But then DC, right, he went up to heavyweight after being the light heavyweight champion, defeated Stipe Miocic via first round knockout, and afterwards we saw Brock Lesnar come into the Octagon and face off with DC, where both guys shoved each other. This was a fight that a lot of people were hyped for because Brock Lesnar would be returning to fight DC, who is arguably one of the greatest fighters of all time. And not only that, but he's coming out of retirement to fight for the belt. That would have been a massive fight. So why wasn't the fight made? Well, the reason the fight wasn't made is because Brock Lesnar never really had any intention of fighting DC at all. Matter of fact, it seems that it was really just a negotiation ploy with WWE, where Brock Lesnar was trying to tell WWE, look, if you don't pay me more, I got other options. I can go to the UFC and fight DC. So this was more of a negotiation tactic rather than an actual thing that was going to happen. We saw similar thing happen with Michael Venom Page and Cedric Doumbé at the PFL, sort of to pressure the UFC's hand a little bit. So MVP could say, look, I got options. I can go to the PFL. It's no big deal. Let's just get this done. All right, number 4 is the return of Brock Lesnar, but we're talking about Brock Lesnar versus Fedor Emelianenko. Now, Fedor is one of those rare fighters that was never in the UFC and gets a lot of praise. I mean, there isn't a lot of fighters you could really put in that category, but he's definitely one of them. And the problem was that Fedor would just not agree to terms with the UFC, whether it was money or whatever. He would not agree, and Dana White was trying to put on that fight so hard back in the day between Brock Lesnar and Fedor Emelianenko because people consider, even to this day, that Fedor is the best heavyweight of all time. And he just was never tested in the UFC, so that's one of the biggest things on his record that a lot of people are like, how could we really gauge how good he is because he wasn't fighting the cream of the crop competition at the UFC? I mean, Dana White tried to make this fight so many times. He flew to Fedor multiple times to try to make a deal, and this would have definitely been a massive fight. But Dana White was super mad about the whole situation. The fight never got signed.
I hate Fedor. I really don't hate Fedor. You know, his management, these guys are made the biggest fuck up in the history of all sports. You know, we flew down there. You heard me talk about the island and all this shit. Flew down there and tried to make Brock Lesnar versus Fedor. And it was for big money.
Alright, you know this list is going to be good when this is number 3. My number 3 is Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. Now, this is a fight that seemed like it was back and forth in the making for like 2 or 3 years. Francis Ngannou defeated Stipe Miocic months after Jon Jones had vacated his light heavyweight title, saying he wants to move up to heavyweight and finally challenge for the belt. Now, Francis Ngannou, like I say, knocked out Stipe, very impressive performance, and he called out Jon Jones. Now, around this time, Jon Jones was actually trying to tell the UFC, look, I want more money. You guys got to pay me more money. And Dana White actually went on the press conference kind of shitting on Jon Jones, saying, look, he should go to middleweight and things like that. Basically trying to imply Jon Jones wasn't really up to the challenge or that he found it too risky. Then eventually, you know, time goes by. Jon Jones is interested. Francis Ngannou's having his old beef with the UFC. Ngannou goes through a whole year-long negotiation process, and the UFC and Ngannou do not come to terms, which makes Ngannou leave, and Jon Jones challenges for a vacant heavyweight title against Cyril Gane. Now, this matchup, I think, would have been very interesting because, look, Francis Ngannou, I don't think is necessarily the best fighter skill for skill. Jon Jones, on the other hand, is so well-rounded, he's so intelligent, and with that being said, you know, casual viewers that don't know what I'm talking about would be like, well, why wouldn't Jon Jones win? It's because Ngannou has that power that negates all skill, right? It doesn't matter the skill you have. You could be perfect for 24 minutes. If he lands it on your chin, that big right hand, you're going out. I mean, did you guys see that new video of Francis Ngannou punching that bag, getting like the max score with minimal effort? I mean, Francis Ngannou is an anomaly. Like, I don't know how the guy punches so hard, but it would have been interesting because Jon Jones would have been super careful, and we've seen Jon Jones Jones get caught before, right? I think that his boxing is definitely the weakest martial art in his skill set. So it would have been interesting to see if Francis Ngannou can pressure him backwards. Could he have gotten some shots across? Could he have landed, a Hail Mary blow? Or could have Francis Ngannou just have been better than him and defended those takedowns and put on a good performance? Or would have Jon Jones just ragdolled him like he did to Cyril Gane? I mean, we don't know, and that's what sucks, is that this was a fight that I still want to see to this day. I mean, we saw recently that the PFL trying to kind of get the UFC's attention, trying to do a cross promotion. Guys, the fight's never gonna happen. Never, ever. It's sad to say, but it's never gonna happen. I just don't see it unless Jon Jones leaves the UFC or something like that. But even then, I don't think Jon Jones really is interested in an Ngannou fight. But it looks like we'll just never see that fight. Alright, number 2, I think a lot of you guys are going to be scratching your heads at home. My number 2 pick is Khabib versus Tony Ferguson. Yeah, I know, I think a lot of people are expecting, hey, why isn't this number 1, Jack? Like, why couldn't have this been number 1? What could possibly be number 1? We're going to get into it, guys. Calm down. I promise you my number 1 is better. Now, this is definitely one of the most infamous fights when you're talking about fights that have never been made. I mean, that's up there with Brock and Fedor. This is one of the most iconic fights because this fight had been scheduled like 4 times. There was a time where Khabib missed weight, and then there was a time where Tony Ferguson tripped over the wire, and then there was the time where a whole global pandemic happened because the UFC decided to book it again. I mean, the fight just kept getting canceled and canceled, and it was the biggest what if because Khabib is a very good grappler, and Tony Ferguson, especially in his prime, was known for being good on the back with his elbows, with, his guard. So a lot of people were like, look, it's interesting because you never know, can Tony Ferguson catch him? Because if we're going to be honest, especially in his championship reign, we never really saw Khabib against grapplers. We saw him mostly against strikers. So it would have been really interesting to see, hey, how does he handle a good jiu-jitsu guy like Tony Ferguson, where maybe Tony Ferguson could keep him in his guard? Maybe it's going to be harder to pass the guard of Tony than other guys. And like I said, the last time they were scheduled, I believe it was like April 18th. COVID happened, right? Khabib could not enter the country for one reason or the other, and the UFC decided to book Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson, and obviously Tony Ferguson has never won a fight since and got brutally battered in that fight. It was a tough watch, and honestly, I want to stop talking about Tony Ferguson because I'm gonna get sad. But yeah, I would have really loved to see these two in their prime. I think a lot of people are going to rewrite history and say, oh, no way, Tony could have won. Look, am I saying I would have picked Tony? I probably wouldn't. I probably would have picked Khabib. But you can't lie, especially at the time, it was a competitive matchup. A lot of people were talking about it. Khabib being undefeated, Tony Ferguson being the guy who was on a 12-fight win streak. I mean, the fight was just so hype, and I would have loved to see it, man. It really sucks that we'll never see it. But my number 1 pick, my number 1 fight that we never got to see, what it could be better than that, guys, I'm talking about George St. Pierre versus Anderson Silva. Now, this was a fight that the fans had talked about time and time again. The UFC had talked about time and time again. Both fighters had talked about time and time again. And it was inevitable, right? Because during that period of time, George St. Pierre was dominating the welterweight division, and just 15 pounds heavier. I mean, you saw Anderson Silva dominate his middleweight division, and it only made sense. When are these two champions gonna fight? Maybe George St. Pierre goes up in weight. There was even talks of Silva going down in weight, and both guys are considered to this day to be one of the greatest fighters of all time. So if those two fought in their prime, I mean, that would have been a massive deal. But there were multiple reasons, in my opinion, why this fight never happened. I think really the fight was always there, could have been made at any time. I just think that the UFC at the end of the day didn't want to kill one star, right? They had two big stars, right? They had two dominant champions. I don't think the UFC wanted to kill one of them off. I think they'd rather, just sell their own pay-per-views, make them separate events and capitalize on them. Which I get it. At the end of the day, you're building a business, but obviously us fight fans are going to suffer in the process because we all wanted to see that fight. I also think the weight was a bit of a problem. I mean, yeah, George St. Pierre did eventually go up to 185 pounds against Michael Bisping. Who do I think would have won, guys? It might be an unpopular opinion, but I think George St. Pierre would have won. I think he would have out-grappled him. I think we've seen Anderson Silva in the past struggle against stronger wrestlers. And I think, yeah, the size difference is a little bit of a question mark. Could George St. Pierre hold down a guy like Anderson Silva, a BJJ black belt, a guy that is used to fighting 15 pounds heavier than him, and sometimes even fighting over 35 pounds heavier than him? I mean, Anderson Silva is big, and that I think is his biggest advantage, and of course the striking, but I think George St. Pierre might have gotten, I don't know, now I'm kind of convincing myself that George St. Pierre wouldn't win this fight. I'm going to be honest. I don't know, but that's the thing that sucks, is we will never know. We'll never know who's going to win this fight in their prime. It could have happened, but it never did. But that, in my opinion, was the best fight that was never made. But guys, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Make sure to check out my video talking about UFC 300 and that being a massive disappointment. And check out my other video where I talk about a potential matchup between Brian Ortega and Ilia Topuria and how I think Brian Ortega would absolutely get demolished in that matchup. Go check it out there. Thank you guys for watching. You guys are the best fan base in MMA, and I'll see you guys in the next one.